when we really embrace the facets of our being and where we come from and the ingredients that have made us who we are, that's when we can actually find the seat of power of what we can uniquely offer and what we can uniquely say. That means more because we're saying it.
What follows is a conversation with Nadia Irshaid Gilbert, an artist, filmmaker, and cook. In her work, Nadia explores the concept of Palestinian cuisine as both archive and offering, reviving ancestral knowledge and asking what it means to nourish. Her work invites us to experience the cultural heritage of Palestine as both a political and spiritual act. This is a conversation about roots, about making things with your hands, and about finding belonging, not just in place, but in presence. Nadia.
Hey.
How are you?
Alhamdulillah. Good.
In this season of your life, is there something that you feel is the through line for you? And it's the thing that maybe you've been looking for, and simply to ask you the question, Nadia, what are you seeking?
What am I seeking? I think what I was seeking for a very long time was a sense of belonging and a sense of feeling like I had a place and I really belonged on this earth and in community, and spent a lot of time feeling very alone, and that there was something wrong with me for that. In truth, I think, especially over the last 5 or 6 years, my focus in my life has turned less so toward me and my sense of belonging and more toward the Creator and my innate sense of belonging because of and with the Creator. And I think what I was seeking always, all along, was to feel closer to God and to feel more, to feel that deep inner knowing and remembrance and reminder that I am always connected to the Creator, and that I do not have to seek anything outside myself to know and feel that, even and especially in the toughest and most questionable moments where that didn't really feel like a given. Yeah, I think that's kind of it is that simple for me, I think.
How does it show up in your work, in the things that you've been drawn to, relationships and friendships and places you just decided to live, such as this one? Does that all kind of fit into this intention that you've described?
Yeah. Well, I feel that when we're living deeply in connection with and in alignment with God and with the Creator and with our spiritual experience, when we're really living in alignment with that, everything in our life unfolds around and from that. I think for me, my inner sense of peace and well-being and self-trust really solidified when I made it my intention and I think the word is niyyah, to have God with me and in my sphere, in my awareness, and in every choice I make, in everything that I do, whether it's in my creative life or my work or my relationships with people. Like everything kind of shifted away from the self-centered suffering that happens when we feel like we're really doing it all on our own.
Right.
And that became a greater focus in my life. I think in my mid-20s, like there was a time when it sort of felt like there was nowhere else.
How do you track that journey for yourself?
Well, I feel really grateful that I've always had very strong faith. Like I was raised with Islam in a very, very compassionate, loving, beautiful household that like Islam for me was always a deep source of peace. And like this, it was never something that felt like it took from me, or was, you know, I know a lot of people have like difficult experiences, right, being raised in households of faith, depending on how they're, you know, brought up with it. But I feel like I, alhamdulillah, just was given like such a really strong foundation, and always had that foundation, and never felt like I veered away from it. But there came maybe a time when I was just feeling continuing to feel like I didn't belong, continuing to feel like I didn't maybe have real unconditional love for myself, like love for the being that I am, and that I was sort of like just a coming home and a remembering of that ultimate that core that was always there. It's like, I think for a while I could take it for granted that it felt like, you know, oh, my faith is strong, but like, it's not until your faith is tested that your faith becomes strong. Really.
Wow, okay.
Right.
Yeah. That journey of self-compassion, self-awareness, self-knowledge is I like the coffee.
It's really nice. It's really nice.
Yeah, this one's a special one. Yeah, I mean, this journey of seeking and changing year after year is, I think, really, really profound, because I think a lot of people go through life where they just don't change. They kind of hit a steady state and they just they stick to that. I get the feeling that you're the kind of person that goes through evolutions and, you know, changes. And I wanted to kind of zone in on, if we could, just the past, you know, 2 years or 1 year, or since, you know, you started doing a lot of content online. You were doing content for a long time, but specifically around what's happening in Palestine over the last year. There's something about the way that you were approaching that conversation that showed me that there was a deeper thing happening inside of you, that you were going through some kind of evolution. And I just wanted to sort of ask about that, how that's affected you, how that's come in your work, and, you know, what that's been like for you inside.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, you know, it's interesting. I find myself in an interesting place with this, particularly right now, because I have always felt, I've always known deeply that my voice was important, and that I had a unique perspective to share, and that part of my job here in this life is to share it in hopes that others might help other people expand their perspectives beyond what they thought was possible, or how they thought they needed to look at a certain thing in the world. And that's a role that I've taken very seriously and felt very clear on. And, you know, for me, speaking about Palestine is very easeful, very natural, very, I feel blessed in that I see what's happening, and I feel like I perceive it very, very clearly from a higher perspective than that of my human here. And I try to speak from that place. And
what is that perspective?
I mean, I want to say, you know, the higher perspective, you know, the perspective knowing that there's a creator who sees all that's happening. And not to say that, like, I have
is that the idea that there's infinite justice, that
yeah,
that, because for many who become activists and who feel moved by this, who don't have a perspective like that, it can destroy
Yeah.
yourself. You know, it can destroy you, because obviously that justice is not coming in this world
Yeah.
for those children,
Yeah.
for Khalid, for Reem, Hind, all of them. But if you believe that what's coming is greater, I think that definitely changes the perspective, doesn't it?
I think we have to understand that there is so much we will not understand and cannot understand. And if we are people of faith, and if we are people who, well, first, I think it's truthfully imperative for anyone to find their spiritual connection, and to find to be practicing and engaging with that part of their being and their experience. Because if you do not, then you're going to just fall into despair and logicking and trying to make sense of it all. And I think especially in the last couple of years, I have leaned into and leaned on faith more than I ever have, because it doesn't feel like an option not to, you know?
Yeah.
And you know, interestingly, right now, I've felt called to speak out so much, and I'm in this moment wanting to continue to speak, and also kind of in this constant state of questioning of what is really worth it to say, and what do people need to hear, and how best to deliver it without being just reactionary. I'm just not interested in being reactionary. I'm interested in breaking up that noise very, very intentionally. So I'm thinking about this a lot, and what the last couple years of allowing myself to just speak my mind, when maybe in the past I would like hesitate or question or be like, I do everything with great intention, but I have opened myself much more to really just share more than like before. I think
that's beautiful. And if I had to name it, I think I would call it spiritual courage. You know, and I think that that's a wonderful and a very important thing, that this is not necessarily encouraged in our culture, to be, you know, to have a spiritual perspective, let alone talk about it on camera.
I know.
It's a private thing.
Yeah.
You know?
Even this feels like almost like, oh, we can share these thoughts more than just like one-on-one conversations, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious, because I know you're in community with a lot of people who don't necessarily have the same faith as you, or any faith. How do you support them in this conversation, or do you have this conversation with them on any level?
You know, I would say that I found myself now, and I'm so grateful for this, in a community where my closest relationships and most of the people I surround myself with are people who I can talk about God with. And that was not the case for most of, I think honestly that was kind of a turning point for me when I started to come into what I'd always really wanted to do, which was to deepen my faith and to be more actively engaged in conversations about God. And I was, for the majority of, you know, my early 20s, like I didn't have that around me. I didn't have people I could really talk about it with. It wasn't in my surroundings. And I felt so much grief and like frustration around that. And now I will say, all to say that now I feel like I really do have people who I can talk about this with from the perspective that I want to talk about it with. and learn and be inspired and gain new perspectives through those conversations. And I think if I didn't have that, I would feel incredibly frustrated and alone. And it's not sustainable anymore, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, building a spiritual community, or building a community of seekers. I think that's what we want to do with the work I'm trying to do is create the space for that. I think in the traditional Islamic cultures that we come from, there was a spiritual culture, and if there is anything that Muslims can offer the general public, the general culture, it's probably in that space. We probably have a lot there. I mean, even the way we're sitting, the hospitality, the way we eat, the things we eat, the way we prepare food. Maybe we can sort of transition into that conversation, because you got into food through your vlogging and your content creation, and that starts like 2015, right?
I think my first cooking video, which was Fatit Batinjan, was 2016.
Wow.
I think.
Wow.
Yeah.
So tell me about that. Track that journey for us.
That journey.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's such an unexpected. I mean, this is an example of kind of just God doing His work, and that's how I ended up on this path that I'm on. But I've been working in film and working as a DP for several years. That's what I moved to New York to do. And the reason I started cooking was, for background, I was an incredibly picky eater as a kid. Really, really struggled really struggled with food. Food was very stressful. And when I moved away from home and I wasn't eating my mom's food anymore, I wasn't eating Palestinian, traditional kind of foods every day, za'atar every day, like the things that she would make, my soul really suffered, and also I just wasn't feeling good in my body. And I had to, as soon as the minute I had a kitchen and I had access to a little kitchen in college, I just became obsessed with learning how to make everything that I grew up eating. And I would get voice notes from Mama, from Sipto, and it just became a little side obsession of mine. And I had been like making YouTube videos for fun here and there, and I just wanted to make a cooking video because I watched a lot of YouTube chefs. And I loved YouTube chefs because at that time there were so many interesting chefs like Chetna Makan, who's an Indian chef, and these people who made their home recipes, and it was so much more casual and accessible and real than like things I'd see on the Food Network. So I just loved people who were doing that, and I really wanted to try it and make some stuff. So I made my first cooking video, and it did really well. People really loved it, and I was just doing it for fun for years. And it slowly evolved into me doing more food media, getting asked to cook for people, getting asked to do different pop-up type things, and it just kind of, my experience has just grown with each year, and I've continued to learn, and I'm totally self-taught. Like, it started with this little obsession, which I tell people I started cooking as a means of soul survival, because I needed to be smelling and tasting and working with my hands and connecting to my ancestry and my heritage and who I really am through these sensory experiences, which for the first couple years after I moved away from home, I wasn't having, and it felt like a part of me was offline, like a huge part of me was offline. And so I started.
You discovered that after the fact, though. You did it kind of out of habit, or you didn't know why you were doing it necessarily. It was fun. But looking back on it, you see it this way?
Totally. Yeah, absolutely. It was just a joy and fun, and I found it really intuitive and creative, and
even though a lot of the stuff you're doing is traditional.
Because also I think another reason why my mama is amazing is that she, you know, she's a Palestinian woman, raised both her daughters in the States, and she worked so hard to make sure that first we can both speak Arabic, but also that we knew who we were and where we came from. And she made all of these, you know, traditional dishes, but she also would adapt things based on what she had time to do or what she could access in the store. So there wasn't this rigidity around how things have to be made or how they have to look, but that they were still authentic because we were making them, because we were pulling from our ancestry and our taste buds and our intuitions to make this traditional dish. And so even though, you know, I was learning how to make a bunch of different traditional things, they were also already not totally traditional because, you know, my sitto has adapted things, my mom has adapted things, and I learned that we can be flexible, we can be creative, and things don't have to be rigid from the beginning. And so it was always very possibility oriented and open-minded and exciting in that way. I did food things for fun on the side, continuing to shoot, and I think it took me really listening and trusting God, where I was really clearly being told to put my focus on this and really embrace it, even though I didn't go to cooking school and I didn't work in restaurants, or, you know, I didn't have these traditional like backstories of how I got into it. And
does that trust in God, that piece, come into when you're actually making the dish too?
Oh yeah. Definitely.
I noticed you don't have a scale in your house.
I want a scale. I need a scale.
Inshallah, somebody will buy you a scale.
I'll get a scale. Yeah. No, you know, it's actually really funny because I have a bit of a, I don't know. I think it's always turned out great, but I have this kind of ridiculous confidence in the kitchen where I so many times I've made something for the very first time at a high stakes, for something high stakes. Almost every job or dinner or thing I do, there's at least one dish that I've literally never made before. And I'm just like, it's going to be great. My ancestors are behind me. It's great. It's going to be good. I just trust. Wow. And it always turns out great. Alhamdulillah.
You know, there's a lot. I think there's a lot to that. I always say, I've said this to friends before. You know, because I used to be in a Muslim punk band, and it was very
so
like
cool.
Identity.
By the way,
yeah. Thank you very much. Very identity, kind of like looking at our identity, taking pieces of, you know, art and then like flipping it, like using the artifacts of our cultures and turning them into emblems. But I think in my later years, my shift into sort of the spiritual, I'm much more interested in connecting to the souls of my ancestors rather than their cutlery. You know?
What do you mean by their cutlery?
Like their utensils,
like the tools they used,
the mugs, the patterns, the trinkets, the trinket culture. Whereas it's like in Palestine, 200 years ago, they're not like looking up at a recipe, measuring. It's kind of like you know the range of possibilities. Like you're like, I know this ingredient very well. I know this ingredient very well. I know that it's been presented like this. I had, you know, one time I had it at so-and-so's house like this. I want to try that. You know, like there's a living memory, a living kind of, and I hear that in the way that you're approaching food, which is so exciting in a way that, you know, you don't really see that. And so how do you put that in a book? You can't.
It's hard to put. I'm trying to figure out how you can put it in a book, but it's hard to. It's teaching into. It's a connection. It's an intuition, and I believe everybody has that.
Absolutely.
You know, I think some people would disagree, but I think everybody has that.
Now online, you go by Nadia Diaspora, which, you know, it's a question I have for you actually. Is what do you think diaspora means? What does that mean to you? Because you're not fully, your father's not Palestinian, but how are you connecting? What does diaspora mean in the sense that, like, you couldn't go back to Palestine and just be from there.
Yeah.
You're a fully new thing.
Yeah.
That doesn't exist there, but exists here. And in some ways, one of my teachers says that, like, our generation, we're intergalactic travelers. We go from galaxies to galaxies, and we speak the language, and we can translate. So yeah, what is diaspora?
What is diaspora? I think I identify the word or being of the diaspora as just similar to what you just said, just kind of being this like flexible, malleable, and this is the being in the Palestinian diaspora. Being in diaspora meaning not residing in the place where my blood is from, not being in a different place from like where my blood is from. That's something I used to really get down on myself about, and really feel like, that not enoughness, that, all of these stories that third culture kids experience. But how I relate to it now is from a place of power. Why? Because I believe that there are no mistakes, and there's a reason that I'm here. There's a reason that I come from where I do, and I was raised the way I was, and I have the skills that I have, and all of those things have come together for me to have a job and a role to do here. And so, it is this I take sort of a sense of duty with it. And I think everybody has their own role and duty to play in their life when they really, come into a deep embodied understanding and truth that they have that. I picked the name Nadia Diaspora because it rings well. It gives the idea, it gives a sense of, where I don't know, I'm Palestinian, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think I thought about it that much when I did, but I think that it's truthfully, it feels, being in diaspora to me feels like, in some sense, being an ambassador of this unique Palestinian experience. So when I even tell people I make Palestinian food, I think I make Palestinian diasporic food, because it comes from the many influences and places and teachings that have made me the kind of cook that I am, and made me the kind of creative person that I am. And that is very different from somebody who was born and raised in Palestine and is there right now, and their experience. And I feel like it's important to differentiate and not sort of claim myself as just, I feel like it is important to note that multifaceted, specific diasporic experience as being the perspective that I speak from. Because when we fully embrace, like, how do I say this? When we really embrace the facets of our being and where we come from and the ingredients that have made us who we are, all parts of those ingredients, that's when we can actually find the seat of power of what we can uniquely offer and what we can uniquely say. That means more because we're saying it. You know what I mean?
I think so.
I feel like that was kind of a bit of a tangent.
Well, I guess what I'm thinking about is a couple things. One is, are we not all diaspora in some way? Like, we're all from somewhere else. Yeah. And in a primordial sense, we're truly from somewhere else. We're not from this world. Which is interesting. But I think that what way you're describing diaspora as a responsibility is like, it's a choice. You could have been just Nadia Gilbert, but Nadia Diaspora is like, no, I'm gonna investigate this category of diaspora and think about, how does it work? What are the principles of diasporic cooking? The connection you're talking about, the intuition you're talking about.
I love that question. I think there's a certain way of there's sort of a dance and a balance between remembering and honoring the traditions that came before, while also breaking out of rigidity and allowing oneself to be creative and to be something new.
Yeah.
Because of all the ingredients that have made you who you are. There's like this kind of dance between and a balance between both the reverence and the honoring of the tradition and also the like creating new traditions. And there has to, both of them have to exist in order for us to, I think, have meaningful impact of any kind.
Yeah.
We can't really have one or the other in order to actually have the kind of meaningful impact that we might want to have in whatever we do.
What happens if you just focus on the one?
Well, I think.
Or what's missing?
Yeah.
Like, what are you losing out on if you just follow the tradition, or you're just fully in, like, I'm just grabbing what's in the grocery store and finding what I can find?
I mean, when we don't have when we don't have any ancestry or tradition to root us, we're ungrounded, we're unrooted. There's no there's a richness in what we're doing that's missing. And it can be also, I think it can lean into feeling extractive. You know, when we are there's taking pieces of what we like and mishmashing it. It just isn't going to feel rich, and it isn't going to feel rooted. And there is, on the other end, a huge importance in preservation and remembrance and honoring ancestral ways, and many things that, and many instances, many contexts where it is really important to follow and to honor, especially when we're not well knowledgeable in the full picture of that tradition and ancestry. And this is a tough thing, because I know that particularly for Palestinian food, preservation is so incredibly important, because our food is being actively co-opted and appropriated and stolen and renamed as something else. And so preserving our foodways is vital. And so there's this, like, it's kind of, it can feel challenging to even talk about or challenge that, because what I do see is that others have taken our cuisine and then reinvented it and done things with it, and many of our people have felt like we can't allow ourselves to think outside the box or think a little more creatively, because we can't.
I want to dig into that, because I find that Palestinian eating and cooking has a lot of openness to it and creativity inherent to the way that and not just cooking, just like the way that Palestinians are. It's a very heterogeneous culture. It's not a single thing. But because of the fight and the struggle and what you're talking about, the appropriation, it forces them to be put into, like, the trinketization of culture. Like, yes, this is me. This is the shape of the map is Palestine culture. We have to find emblems rather than fully being. And I think that's the spiritual struggle of specifically the Palestinian diaspora. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, definitely.
Well, to that end, I mean, I feel like this is really what you're. To me, that's like one of the most beautiful things of your work that you're offering. To kind of start forging and charting that path back to wholeness through using your hands, cooking, getting beautiful ingredients, getting beautiful Palestinian olive oil, supporting the good brands and the good people who are doing these things. And maybe you can reflect on that, but then also, if anyone's listening to this conversation is thinking, I want to start that journey. You have any advice for them?
In life in general, or in food? Or
You can say
like
in
mix?
food and craft.
In craft.
I think food is a great path in because we all eat.
It is.
We all.
It's the quickest way to someone's heart, I think.
Yeah. And I found that with coffee personally, like roasting coffee and what that's done for me. Not everyone can roast coffee, and that's fine. Like, you find your thing. But I think just, even just eating healthy in this culture is a revolutionary act. But what we're talking about here is like far more revolutionary, far more in that spiritual culture. And giving people a journey into that thing. Like, it starts in your kitchen, or starts in the grocery store, or it starts on the farm or the farmer's market. Like, what is take us into that world of like how someone can kind of chart their day. I'm going to eat in a way that's going to, it's going to be this diasporic cooking, it's going to be this journey. I'm going to start trying to connect to the intuition, to the ancestry, to the tradition, but also to where I am, in this living place, with these living things that I'm going to turn into sustenance, and a piece of creativity, and a piece of presence in my life.
Two things came up that feel like kind of gateways into deepening your experience of food, of consuming is such a word I don't like, but of food. And one is just that we are in relationship with both the earth that we're on and everything from the earth that we take into our bodies. And it's a relationship. And so I think, for one, just starting with considering yourself in a back and forth relationship with the food that you're eating and the food that you're making and the plants and the animals, and considering those beings and where they came from the earth to nourish you. And that can lead us to then want to be closer to our food and to think more about what's immediate, what's local, what's surrounding me, what's really fresh right now. Because that's not a given in our culture. That's not a given in the way our society is structured today. So we have to make that effort to really think about that. But it's so life-giving and rich and beautiful when we do. And it's also, just in the context of Palestinian food, to me, one of the most Palestinian things I can do is eating hyper-local and thinking about what is surrounding me. Because the cuisine changes throughout the map. There are dishes that are made in certain areas that are not made in other areas because of what grows there. And so I think the first thing is really just considering your relationship to what's surrounding you, and maybe starting to practice more listening rather than telling. And the other thing is, I think when entering into a deeper relationship with the food in your life and with your meals, I also just go back to the emotionality of it, and the tastes and the flavors and the scents that make me feel things. Scent is one of the most accessible sort of emotional trigger senses that we have in our body. You can smell something and it can bring you back to a memory in your life. And so for me, I've been very, very scent-led with, the reason when I first started cooking, I was gifted some of my Sitto's 7-spice, and it was being able to smell her 7-spice with some onions and garlic on the stove that just was immediately healing to me. And so I think tapping into the comfort and the scents and the tastes that make us feel at home, and working with and listening to our emotions in relation to that will actually guide us down our path of discovery, wherever it should go. Yeah, that's what I would say.
It's beautiful.
Thanks.
Thank you.